Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Rosslyn Ives, who's a humanist and an editor of several humanist magazines. Thanks for coming back again, Rosslyn. When we were speaking last time, we were talking about the role of ethics. Can I just reiterate a general view of what a humanist might be? This is the Humanist Society of Victoria's description, and that is to support diversity, human rights, and the well-being of all humanity using only human capabilities. Now, just setting that as a baseline, and I have your brochure here, which is the description of the Humanist Society of Victoria's activities and belief structure. And there's a list here of ethical values which humanists subscribe to. Can we go through those point by point and fill them out a bit? The first one is to respect for the dignity of every person. Now, where does that take humanists to? What are the sorts of activities which grow out of that respect for humanity?
Well, I guess that flows on to our support for human rights. Mm-hmm. I mean, we just see all humans as having the same equal rights to lead, hopefully, a reasonable life.
Yes.
I guess that's the basis of it. We certainly don't see a hierarchy of some people being more worthy than others.
So that addresses an issue of basic human rights. And humanism, there's lots of activities in that regard that you're aware of, but I'm talking internationally here.
Actually, there are. The International Humanist body has representation at the United Nations.
Oh, okay, right.
I think it's like non-government status. I think that's how it works. And they speak out for human rights or human right violation wherever they see it. And that, it's in an area where humanists would be concerned. Particularly things like treatment of women, for instance, or I know that's one that they've been quite heavily commenting on.
Well, human rights is a big issue which hits the headlines quite often. So does that imply that the humanism is perhaps a growing group? Do you think there's more humanists than perhaps we at first think?
Well, I think there probably are a lot more humanists without them realising they're humanists. I mean, in a country like Australia where increasing numbers of people are not identifying with a religion, but they're still trying to lead good lives, probably if you poked them long enough and gave them a few definitions,
few leads, yes.
they might say, oh, I'm a humanist, in the sense that they are leading their life as best they can, drawing on human experience and knowledge.
Right. That touches on perhaps, I think you mentioned in an earlier conversation, that one of your key interests actually is the question as it's posed about religions in the census form. Yes,
well, myself and some others within the humanists have been putting in submissions every 5 years. When there's a census, we get an opportunity to have our 5 pence worth. And what concerns us is that the so-called religion question asks people, what is the person's religion? And that implies that everyone has a religion.
Oh, okay.
And then the choices are, they list actually by name with little tick boxes all the major religions where you can just tick it off, you don't even have to write it in. And then there's the other, meaning other religion. And then underneath that, no religion, which is like a redundant little bit at the bottom.
Yes.
And I'd have to say, going back to my talking about being raised to Church of England, I would have ticked Church of England long after I hadn't been involved, because I'd think, oh, the government just wants to know what I grew up as.
Oh,
And I think a lot of people think like that. In fact, there's a delicious loony cartoon. There's a couple of obvious hippies sitting in a spa tub, one of them with a hooker, and they're filling out the census, and one says to the other, "We're C of E, aren't we?"
Yes, that's a very important question, isn't it? Because it distorts
the data.
Yes, yes.
I mean, we know that actual numbers that go to church is quite small on a regular basis.
Yes.
And we know that very large numbers of people are using civil celebrants for funerals, or celebrations of life and marriage in increasing numbers.
Yes.
So that, you know, they're walking away from their previous, where you'd previously had some attachment to religion. But it's not reflected. Incrementally, the religious numbers, the standard Christian religion numbers are going down, and the non-Christian religions are sort of going up, but they're still a tiny minority. And the non-religious category is also going up, but only slightly.
Yeah, much of it being buried under the distortion which
the question. And we've been saying, the question should say, does the person have a religion? Yes, no. If so, what is it?
And that then leads to another point that we were discussing once again earlier, is about Australia describing itself as a Christian nation, government officials particularly doing so.
Indeed.
Now, part of the entitlement to do that perhaps arises from the confidence of the census outcome.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I've even seen religion in Australia in guidebooks quoting that figure. And every journalist or researcher, that's where they go, that data off the census.
Okay.
And that's the key thing. And yet a lot of social research will give you a different answer.
Yes, it's not just an important question for humanism, obviously. It's an important question for the religions themselves in their statistics and their marketing and everything else that goes with it.
It's a big area. We shouldn't discuss it any further.
No, I think we've done enough with that one. Now, the second ethical issue consideration from your brochure is expressions of consideration and empathy towards all persons, but, and this is the key one, other life forms. Now, how does that go? Is that a green statement? What is it?
Yeah, I suppose it is a green statement. The humanists, and the early idea of what a humanist was very focused on humans, and animals were not in the, or care for the environment and care for other animals wasn't in the picture. But increasingly, in recent years, humanists have been speaking out and saying, no, we've got to have regard for animals as well. Now, Peter Singer is a good example of that. He's a humanist. He's been a humanist. We have a Humanist of the Year award that we give out each year, and he's been one of our recipients. And when he was accepting the award and we had a dinner for him, he said it would be really nice if we had a vegetarian meal. And we did.
Yes.
But he's just one of a number of humanist writers and speakers who are starting to say, no, we've got to have concern for the environment and other species as well. So that explains that.
Well, thank you for that. And when you have people like Peter Singer behind it, that truly is quite powerful observation.
Indeed.
But we'll go to a break and then come back to these ethical questions, because it's explaining humanism in a very powerful way. Thank you. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Rosslyn Ives. Rosslyn's a humanist, and she's the editor of several humanist magazines. And we're talking about ethical issues, and I'm taking you through the description of the ethical values of humanism on your brochure here. Third point. Humanists' values endorse settlement of disputes by discussion, negotiation and treaty rather than by violence. Pacifism?
No, it lends itself to that interpretation, but we wouldn't be anti having armed forces, and there may be occasions when you'd want to use that sort of thing. But I mean, punitively locking people up, I'm thinking more of the prison type of thing. We feel that's probably gone over the top.
Right. So settlement of disputes and discussions by negotiation and treaty. Now, where would you go to get the negotiation? Is that something that the humanists would see them being involved in through the United Nations, as you said?
Oh, well, I guess for petty crime and bullying and stuff like that, you ought to be able, you should be able to get the parties together. Is there something called restorative justice? Is it some method that I think uses that sort of approach?
Yes, it does. And does so locally that operates?
Yeah,
in local,
yes,
so
it would work for in a local sense.
So the local humanists, are they active in those areas, like the Humanists Association of Victoria? How is it involved in that? Are there any?
No, we're not overly active. I mean, we would support those ideas, but we're not active beyond being supportive of it.
But it's one of your values.
It's one of our values, yes. I mean, we've
yes.
heard speakers on it a number of times. And we're fairly strong supporters of the United Nations, weak though it is, for settling international disputes if they can manage it. I mean, we certainly see there's a role there for something like the United Nations, and we hope that they do a better job, but there you go.
Yes, exactly. But so that the humanists would, generally speaking, have the view that the human animal will justifiably turn to violence to settle disputes at a certain point. You don't see the human animal as being, when it's violent, being non-human?
No, I don't think we would say that. We'd think it would be an unfortunate turn of events, but we wouldn't want to call it unhuman.
No. So very pragmatic view.
It is a pragmatic view.
Yeah. Okay, point 4. You support or endorse individual freedom balanced by social responsibility. So that sort of gets into a similar sort of area, doesn't it?
We see that as a very core sort of value. I mean, we see people should be able to make their own decisions. I guess we're talking about adults, not so much children. But there's a reciprocal responsibility to the other people that you interact with, the people in your family, your friends, the people you work with.
Yes.
And we see that as, a really key thing.
So it's not freedom for freedom's sake. It needs to be in social context.
In social context. I mean, we are social animals, and we have to live as social animals in society, and you have to work out ways to get on. And so there's a big lot of responsibilities for what freedoms you claim.
Now, you use the term social animals. Could you explain that a bit further, realising that some people would rail at us being called animals at all?
Well, I guess this is, as far as we would be concerned, we have evolved like other animals. We are animals, come on. We're just the only representative of our species. But not that many years ago, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, there were a whole series of human species. And for different reasons, which we're not sure exactly why, the other human species have died out.
Yes.
And we're the only one left. And that makes the gap between us and what we're related to look bigger than it probably really should do.
So
but we do have some additional capabilities that seem to lift us away from the animals.
So that would be a general humanist perspective. There's a lot of rationalism in that too, isn't there? That's a sort of almost a rationalist perspective, to see that evolutionary context for the human.
Well, I think rationalists would definitely think the same way, but are you doubting this, that we didn't evolve?
I'm not. I'm neutral. I'm the interviewer.
I see. I'm
not doubting it. I just want to examine it just from the context, the illumination of humanist belief structure. That's all. Without nailing it down.
The basis of our ethics,
ethics. I can't relate ethics to time, but we're out of time.
Oh, right.
So we'll be back in a moment. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Rosslyn Ives, and she's a humanist and editor of several humanist publications. We're still running through those ethical principles. We have the last one coming up now, which is actually a really important one, in my view at least, is that you endorse values in relation to rearing children to be honest, fair and kind in their dealings with others. What does this humanist, or what do the humanists do as sort of a collective activity there? Do you have processes of education, or do you offer programs, go into schools?
Well, we'll go and speak in schools if someone asks for someone to speak on humanism, but we don't. We get more invitations from the U3A than schools. But what do we do? Not a lot with children, although there's a bit of activity at the moment of trying to put together an ethics course as an alternative to special religious instruction.
And yes, I'm familiar with that. How far has that been progressed?
It's not very far. It's pushing towards a trial to see if there's a need for it and it will work. And so it's very much in the planning at the moment.
Have you got any idea what the response from schools and educators are in relation to it?
Well, I'm not involved in that program that much, but I was told the other day that there's been quite favourable response from some schools and some parents. So there's clearly an interest out there. So how far it goes, I guess time will tell.
Well, it's very topical at the moment, of course, isn't it? Because there's that issue with that pamphlet or brochure that was handed out at schools.
Yes, I think there is a reasonable concern, I think, from parents of what has been handed out in some schools, as we've heard reported.
And of course that goes back to the census question, because the belief is that there's more of particular religions than perhaps there are. So offering the religious answer doesn't fulfil the needs of some parents.
No, well, what's happened in recent years, it's a whole complicated story, but the schools used to say to parents, do you want your child to have special religious instruction? And if the parents don't say anything, the child goes into the class anyhow.
Okay.
And then recently, just in the last couple of years, the parent must say they're to go into the class. They can't just get scooped in. And the numbers have dropped off enormously, apparently, now that there's a requirement that the parent positively says we want it.
It's a matter of discernment, isn't it? That's quite interesting. And talking about discernment, and this is a very interesting little brochure you have here, but I've turned over to Australian Humanists of the Year. How long has that been going?
If I'm remembering off the top of my head, I think it began in 1983.
1983, yep.
And the first Humanist of the Year was Lionel Murphy.
Okay.
Who was, in 83, he was probably a High Court judge.
He would have been that.
I think so.
Well, I've got the list here of, and as you mentioned before, Peter Singer and Philip Adams, just to pick some of them out, Bob Brown, Julian Burnside, these would be all names that people would realise, recognise quickly. Gareth Evans as a legislator, Tim Flannery as a biologist, Fred Hollows as a health reformer. And it goes on, and as you say, Philip Nitsky, a medical reformer. So those people, and I think that informs what humanism is supportive of, is that list of people there. Mm. Would that imply that they are members of the Humanist Society, or they just
not necessarily? We have a voting process where we ask for nominations across Australia, and then we vote for those nominations for that particular year, and somebody's chosen, and then we go to that person and say, this is what's happened, are you prepared to accept the award of Australian Humanist of the Year? And usually, well, actually, in all but one case, they've said yes, thank goodness. And we're not requiring them to join, but just identify as a humanist. Now, some of them are members, but not all of them are.
Yeah. So but they don't object to being
identified
as having humanist principles.
No. Well, they are. We send them material about what a humanist is in case they don't know, and they are willing to identify as a humanist.
Right.
And
that's a fascinating sweep of people there.
It is an interesting mix. Yes.
Now, talking about interesting mixes, looking at your magazine, the Australian Humanist, I noticed an article in there called entitled "Adopt a Dalit Village." Can you give me a bit of an idea of what that is? Explain what a Dalit is first.
Right.
And then,
well, a Dalit is an untouchable in India, and I don't even think they're in the caste system. I think they're classed as outside the caste system.
That's correct.
And they actually, in India now, their constitution does give them equal rights, but that doesn't mean to say it translates into the way things function in the villages where many of them live.
No.
And the Adopt a Dalit Village program was organised by the International Humanist Group, because we have quite a strong number of humanist members and humanist organisation member organisations in India. And they are the ones who do the hands-on in the villages. And the villages aren't Dalit villages. There are villages with Dalits in them. There's a segment of the population are Dalits. And the idea is that we, in a country with money, provide some money to pay for people to go into those villages and give them information about witchcraft's a bit, tell them about their human rights, tell them about how science works, to try and give them some health services and bits of education.
And tell them how time works. It's worked against us. We've come to the end. Rosslyn, thank you so much for a very illuminating insight into humanism. And thank you for giving your time.
My pleasure, Norm.
We'll be back next week with another interview. And thank you so much for watching.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu